Hello world, Michael Campbell here with the Legal Outliers. I want to thank you guys for watching the introduction episode. But today's episode, we have a very prestigious attorney, Mr. Asha White. He's going to tell you about his experiences in law school and his experiences as an attorney, and then we're going to ask him the Legal Outliers question. Stay tuned. Okay, can you please introduce yourself?
My name's Asha White. Very glad to be here on your show, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you.
All right.
So the first question is, what made you want to go to law school?
What made me want to go to law school is a variety of things.
Okay.
I would say number one is I always had an interest in the criminal justice system.
Okay.
I had an interest in what happened when people got arrested. There were a lot of people around me who had, some of those issues. And I think the big thing that happened that added on to that interest, my favorite subject in junior high school was civics, history, all those sort of things, Supreme Court cases. I had an interest in all those things. But I think the big thing that happened for a lot of people of my generation was the O.J. Simpson case happened when I was in high school.
Okay.
And, he was acquitted when I was a junior in high school. And I was in law and society class, and literally, ironically, law and society class in junior high school. They wheeled the TV in, we watched the verdict. I watched every day of that trial on Court TV and CNN, and that's when I decided, that's what I want to do.
Okay.
Yep.
Now the second question is, you spoke about civics being a class that you found interesting when you was in school. Currently, civics is not in any school programs now.
Yes.
Do you believe that the kids are at a disadvantage with that being so?
I love the fact that you asked me that question, because I bother people with this topic all the time.
Okay.
I think civics not being taught in schools is one of the worst things that's ever happened to the public school system or private schools, whatever it is. Civics is not just, some boring little thing where you're teaching people how to salute the flag and say, I love America. It's teaching people about the basics of government, right? About how we function as a society.
Correct.
And I think we're at a crisis in this country where people don't understand how the basics of government works. And this is why, excuse me, it's not why, but it's part of the reason we have so much political division, because people don't understand the rule of law, the separation of powers, and how society and a democratic society is really supposed to work. And this is part of the frustration. A lot of it's just based on misunderstanding. I think if we taught civics, kids would leave with a better understanding of, okay, you can be liberal, you can be conservative, but there was a point in this country where we had at least all had a basic agreement of the principles that we believed in as a society. We didn't always follow those principles, but we had a basic agreement of what those at least principles were. Now we can't even agree on the principles.
Correct. Okay. So my next question is, what made you choose? What law school did you attend?
I attended Northeastern University Law School.
Okay. And when you was an undergrad, did you know that you wanted to be an attorney, or was this something that it developed, or how did that process come along for you?
Great question. I had an interest in being an attorney probably from the time I was 12 or 13 years old, and then in high school, like I said, watching the OJ case and knowing I did a mock trial in high school, that piqued my interest. But like all kids, and this is what kids should do, I went back and forth. Right. Then I went to college. I went to Boston College. I joined student government, student senate, the NAACP. I was vice president. All kind of activities. And I knew that's where I had an interest, but I developed interest in other things as well along the way in college. So I thought at one point in college that I might want to teach. Whether it be high school, junior high school, at the college level. I thought that's what I would want to do. There was a point I wanted to study international affairs because I developed an interest in, different things that were going on overseas at the time. So I went back and forth in college, but ultimately decided that, that was my safest bet, and that's what I wanted to do.
Okay, perfect. So let's rewind a little bit. Give us a little more background about your childhood.
Okay. So, I was born in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Wow.
So I was born in the Caribbean. I moved to Providence, Rhode Island when I was 3. So even though I was born an American citizen, because it's U.S. territory like Puerto Rico is, I still consider myself an immigrant. I consider myself an immigrant because My parents didn't cut my hair in a way that was cool. They didn't buy me the cool shoes. I looked like an immigrant when I went to school.
Totally
and the brothers let me know about it. Right. So, we were getting used to the culture, and my parents came to Rhode Island to go to school.
Okay.
And we were very lucky. I have one older brother. He's a year older than me. He is a vice president over at IBM. So doing very well. About to have his first child. I'm about to lose his mind. Give him a shout out if he's watching this. We were very lucky. My parents were both college professors.
Okay.
And, we had an access into a world that a lot of kids who look like us didn't have.
Correct.
And we were also lucky on the other side. My parents were actually school teachers who went back to school later in life to get their PhDs.
Correct.
So we were there when they got their PhDs. We saw them walk across the stage. We saw it. I know, you were there when you saw your parents get degrees as well.
I see my mom get her doctorate.
It has an effect on you. That's
I
what
agree.
Probably made you want to pursue higher education. That's what made me want to do it too, was watching them. So I got to watch them cross the stage and get their doctorates. But because they were students, I never say we were poor, because that would be an insult to people who were truly poor. But we were broke. I mean, they were students that they really didn't have an income.
Correct.
So we were living in neighborhoods that were just regular working class neighborhoods with regular folks, and that was like the best education to get. Because we were just in public school with regular kids, didn't have a lot of money. So we also got exposed to just what you call real life.
Right.
And we got that I'd say like that sort of street education. We got some of that.
Okay.
And then we were fortunate enough to have educated parents to protect us, though.
Correct.
Where we didn't really have to suffer the pitfalls of some of that. So, my parents were more into the humanities and the liberal arts, so language was very important to them.
Correct.
So being a lawyer was almost a natural transition, because being a lawyer is learning how to manipulate language.
Correct.
I mean manipulate in the best sense of the word.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's what you got to find the loopholes as an attorney, right?
Yes, exactly. So it ended up being that sort of developed interest. But even someone like me, I didn't meet any African American attorneys until I was in high school, and that was one.
Wow.
All right. So I didn't know any attorneys of color growing up at all.
So that brings to my next question. What kind of men were around you as you was developing into a man?
So the most important man was my father.
Okay.
I had a very strong father. My father was my idol. Again, I consider myself really, really lucky. A lot of my friends didn't have their father around, and some of them, the father would be in and out, in different circumstances. Some of them had some great fathers too. It's not everybody. I was very lucky. I had like an ideal father, who was everything a father's supposed to be. He was hardworking. He was respectable. He was honest. He was cheap.
Right.
Right. He was cheap. Wouldn't buy you a lot of stuff. Taught you great lessons, and continued to work his way up. So I was very, very lucky. But I think even kids who have strong parents still need some other people around them. Because I needed people around me who were maybe closer to my age, or who were from a different world. So I had a lot of good influences, starting probably with my youth basketball coach. A guy named Rufus Abdullah took me in at 9-10 years old. I couldn't play worth anything, but I was tall for my age. And he put me on the court, gave me a ton of confidence. Then I worked with another basketball coach named Mike Stevens, who's a big-time referee now. He referees all the Final Fours, the NCAA.
Shout out to Mike Stevens.
That's Mike Stevens if he's watching. And he was one of my basketball coaches, was the most intense human being I ever was around, yelling, screaming, but in a way that made you better. So those guys were my role models in a way too. And then there were a lot of just guys around the neighborhood who taught me through like making fun of me and saying, hey, you gotta get a lineup, you gotta change this, you gotta make yourself look a little better. So they helped me survive day to day in a more urban environment. So and then there were a lot of guys who were doing bad things too. There were a lot of guys around who were doing some other things too, and I learned from them as well. Right.
So now going through high school, you're going through undergrad, you're raising this environment, you have these friends. How did you separate yourself to attend law school, focus, and become a professional in the legal field?
I think that is the most important question that every I mean, I'll say every person who might come from that sort of environment has to answer for themselves.
Correct.
And it's a complex answer in a sense, and it's different for different people. I think at some point you have to make a decision that you might love a person, but if they're not doing anything that's beneficial for you, you have to separate yourself from them. And I did have to make that decision with a lot of friends of mine. You know, it wasn't a circumstance where it was like we can't talk anymore, but I couldn't really spend time with them like I used to, because I was going in a different direction. And honestly, a lot of it happens a little more naturally than one might expect. When you start going to law school, when you get a different sort of job, you start to be in your environment. You start to have less in common with people who might not be doing what they could be doing. So because you have less in common, you just end up spending less time with them. So a lot of that happened, quasi naturally. And then some people was more of a concerted effort. I can't be around that person anymore. There's just a little too much negativity, and this is just not the right time for us to be around each other. So for me, I'll tell you how I did it. For me, like I said, I grew up an hour away in Rhode Island, which is not that far, but still different. I came to college in Boston, so I had a physical separation. I wasn't seeing. I think it's more complicated if you stay local for school. I think it's more complicated at that point. So I had a physical separation when I went to school, and I wasn't seeing people on a daily basis. Then when I went to law school, I was already not around as much for 4 years, but I was still hanging out, seeing people when I came home. And then I went to law school. I stayed in Boston, and I was just seeing people less and less and less. And as they get older too, then they get wives, they get kids, so then they can't spend time with you as much either. I think it's more complicated 25 and under. I think 25 and over, it starts to get it's a little bit easier. I think 25 and under, it's a complex thing to do, especially if you stay local. But you just have to make a decision that, hey, I have to be in this world, they have to be in their world, and that's it.
What piqued your interest when you were younger, growing up around those people?
Mike, I feel like you're trying to sucker me into a Jay-Z argument right
No, listen. Listen.
You're trying to get me into a whole
argument. I'm not trying to get you into a Jay-Z argument, but I just want to know who your favorite artist and what your favorite movie was.
We have history about this discussion. But when I was growing up, it was a really exciting time in music in a sense. Absolutely. So I was born in 1979. So as I'm coming up in the 1980s, this is really hip-hop's first explosion in the late 1980s. So, and I think hip-hop music gets underappreciated for the positive effect it can have on people. We talk about the negative parts. And, there are negative parts. So there are negative things about hip-hop. Yeah, I agree with that.
But are they negative, or are they a representation from the environment that these people that they come from?
I think sometimes they can be both. I think sometimes there are things in hip-hop that are negative, not in and of itself, but maybe to the degree that we play them up, where they begin to dominate the culture a little bit too much. Fair enough. So there are a lot of positive parts about hip-hop, and I think we're just getting to a point where we're acknowledging that, because we're just getting to the first generation that now are doctors, lawyers, consultants, police officers, but they were raised on hip-hop music. We're just getting to that first generation. Probably the generation before me is able to say that. So when I was growing up, my parents got cable in like 1988 or 89. That was a big deal back then. A lot of people didn't have it. That was like a big deal. And when we got cable, Yo MTV Raps debuted in late 1988, and that changed everything for everyone. Now you could actually see hip hop in your living room. You didn't have to like go sneak and buy the tape and cover it up and all that. So I was raised on hip hop music, and the way again they manipulated language was just incredible to me. So probably the first album that blew me away was The Great Adventures of Slick Rick.
I like Slick Rick.
You know Slick Rick?
Absolutely. Children's story. Lolly Dad.
You see, I'm with you. He had this album called The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, where it was one of the first like theme albums in hip hop. It's the theme of the album is he's telling just all these crazy stories throughout the course. That's why it's called The Great Adventure. So every song is a story.
Okay.
And you don't know where the truth stops and like the exaggerations begin. And that's the brilliance of the stories. And he just tells these incredible poetic stories that are making you laugh. He wasn't like yelling like Run DMC at first was like yelling, and he was calm and sarcastic. You know what I mean? And it was this whole different thing. And he was like taking you into a world. So I got into this thing with storytelling and manipulating language. Again, that was a theme in my life. And then obviously there were groups like NWA, Public Enemy, KRS-One, and Boogie Down Productions, and that was the sort of music I was listening to at first. And then as I got into high school, this is what people now refer to as a golden era. I don't use that term because I think a golden era is subjective and generational. That depends. But in high school, this is Biggie Smalls, this is Tupac, this is Mobb Deep, this is Wu-Tang. That's what I came up listening to. This is when the music was still considered edgy and dangerous. There were congressional hearings on hip hop. It was unbelievable. That's what I came up listening to, and that is what showed me how to use language, showed me how to use rhythm along with language, showing me that you can be intelligent and still be edgy, and most importantly, probably showing me that there are at least like 5 or 6 guys that are better rappers than Hov.
Listen, shots. Okay. So I asked that question because I want to be able to pull in the viewers at home to make them understand that, okay, because you're in this environment, because you listen to this music, it does not take you out of the realm of becoming a successful person. Because after you went to law school, you passed the bar, you became an attorney. Let's take it from there.
So, you know, I was just having this conversation today with another attorney that I think the idea, especially when you're a student of color, is in order to be successful, you have to become a different person. You have to completely change yourself. I think that idea is dying. I think it was more prevalent 20 years ago. I think people understand that it's not the case. That's just not true. There are things you have to grow out of. There are things you have to change. You do have to adjust. But I think what more and more people are seeing is that who you are is an asset to what you're trying to do. So you need to take all those parts that you learn. Not all those things are negative. And those things make you unique. They give you a different perspective. And that needs to be fueled into your career as opposed to just getting rid of all of it. So when I went to law school, there were things that I had to change. You start to adjust the way you dress a little bit. You might start to adjust who you surround yourself with, like we talked about. But I didn't adjust the music I was listening to. I stayed with the music I was listening to. That didn't affect anything. It didn't really affect the places I went to go to parties. It was like, well, all of a sudden you're in law school and now I go to the opera only. It's silly, right? So you're still listening to the same music. You still enjoy the same sort of entertainment. You might not be at the most hood party on a Friday night anymore. But that you're gonna age out of that anyway. That doesn't really matter. So I went to law school at Northeastern, and things were up and down for me in law school. I had my first son my first year of law school. And I was 22 years old. So that was a struggle. But I was able to recover and do well. And then I was able to pass the bar on my second time, not my first time. I missed by a close margin.
So you're not perfect.
No.
So everybody at home, you got that. You're not perfect.
So you're gonna, especially when you're coming in and you might be a little younger. When I say younger, I mean anything under 30 coming into law school. Anything under 30. Younger, your life is not going to be 100% in order at all times. So, you have to learn to be able to recover when things don't go well. I think law school is as much about recovering as it is about excelling.
So now you said you had your son in law school. So I currently have an 11-year-old son. So I had my son when I was 18. So now my son's 11 in my last year of law school. So going through the process of law school, we still have to be a father. You still have to educate, even though you have to try to really dive into the material. So how do you feel that affected you as a father? Like going to law school, learning all these concepts, but then having to come home and how did it make you view being a father and raising your son?
Another phenomenal question. I would say that in terms of my view of being a father, that was already set by my father.
Okay.
Like I said, that was I had the fortune of having that.
Correct.
So I had a very strong idea of what a father should be from my own father. So it didn't affect my view so much. I thought a father first and foremost should protect.
Correct.
A father should provide. Those are more the traditional things, but I think they're correct.
Correct.
A father should nurture. A father should be there every day.
Correct.
A father should be the one that kids come to talk to.
Right.
So I still had those same views, but in terms of my performance as a father, I think it was affected. I think it was negative and positive.
Okay.
It's positive in a sense that when you're learning more, you become a better father.
Correct.
Right? The more you learn,
Absolutely.
the more you can give to your child.
Absolutely.
Period.
Correct.
But law school's tough.
Right.
You have to give a lot of focus.
Yes.
And there were times that, I felt bad because
Right.
I have to be focusing on what I'm doing and he wants to play.
Correct.
Right? There are times where I'm going to the park with him and my mind is someplace else.
Correct.
Right? And that lasted into when I was a lawyer. I
Right.
was trying cases and my mind's over there and
Right.
he wants to be, so it's a struggle trying to balance all that, especially for a young person. That's a lot on your mind.
Correct.
So it made me a good father because you're providing a good example for your son. You're working hard. They see you working hard.
Right.
But in terms of just having that freedom where you just want to turn and play with your son or daughter,
Correct.
you don't really have as much of that time as you would like.
Correct.
So as I got older, I started to make efforts to put aside certain times.
Okay.
Like I know you coach basketball.
Absolutely.
I know for me, my son's basketball games
Right.
and his football games, he play football too,
Okay.
were like nothing gets in the way. No one talked to me.
Right.
It's like that was my release.
Correct.
And that was me and his thing.
Right.
Like
Right.
we had a language no one else
Correct.
understood. We could be communicating.
Right.
It was just our thing.
Right.
And I think for sons that's almost more important,
it's very important.
to just have like a
Absolutely.
thing with your
Very
father.
important.
So he understood that I had to work or I had to read a lot.
Correct.
So, I could be a little grumpy here. I gotta get this done.
Correct.
But when it came time,
Right.
what we had to do his thing, it was like we sat down and we would talk about the NBA for 3 and 4 hours. We talk about, the jab step and
Right.
the up fake
Right.
and the crossover.
Right.
And we were just so into it. That was our thing.
Right.
And I think for sons, that's really, really important. And as you get to be a teenager,
Right.
every teenage boy is going to be a little bit at odds with his father. 'Cause
Correct.
you think you
have to be.
you know
I've
what
been
you
there with
wanted.
my father and my stepfather. I
exactly.
definitely know it.
You're going to be a little
Absolutely.
bit at odds because you have your ideas, they have
Correct.
their ideas. So I think when you have that thing in common with your father,
Correct.
that's what keeps you speaking.
Right.
Because
Fair.
you're not really vibing in any other way.
Right.
So when in high school when my dad's annoying me and
Right.
I'm annoying him,
Right.
we would talk about sports or we
Right.
watch the OJ trial together,
Right.
and that's the only time we talking
down and talk about it.
because
Okay.
besides that, I'm gonna close the door in my room.
Right.
And I don't want to talk.
Correct.
So for sons, I think it's really important. I had a daughter later on in life, so I'm a little more experienced with it now, but it was it's a struggle to balance your own learning
Correct.
with your kids' learning.
Absolutely.
So, but as long as you're aware of it,
Right.
that's the important part. Then you get better and better at it.
You have to be.
You
And
know?
that's something that, again, going through the process of law school, I try to focus on when it comes to my son. I try to make sure he gets his time. Rather
Yeah.
it's me coaching his basketball team,
Mhm.
rather it's going to the pool and I'm sitting there, rather I'm helping him with his math or his English.
Exactly.
But I feel like the process of going to law school makes me focus more on his education. It heightened it for me.
Exactly.
It makes me make him understand how important it really is.
Mhm.
And it's not something to be little.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something to be necessarily put down.
And it's important, especially for a young man, because law school really makes you work on your writing
Yes.
and your reading comprehension.
Yes.
And therefore that makes you a better teacher for
Correct.
your son
Correct.
when you're reviewing his compositions
Correct.
or his book reports or whatever they do. I don't know if they still
Correct.
do book reports, but
Right. Well, he's in 5th grade, but we getting there though.
You get
Your turn's coming.
Yeah, So term papers later on,
Right.
you become a little bit better at analyzing those and,
Right.
and helping him with those. So continuing your education is always a benefit to your children.
Okay. So let's fast forward to you passing the bar now. What was that feeling like?
Passing the bar was the greatest day of my career. Still my legal career.
Okay, now after you passed the bar, what was your first job as an attorney?
My first job passing the bar was as an assistant district attorney, as a prosecutor, a DA, right? Whatever word you want to use.
Right.
I was a prosecutor. I started my career in Roxbury Court, then went up to the major felony unit, then went up to the gang unit.
Okay, so now after the gang unit, where did you go after? Like,
well,
how did you?
So after I left the district attorney's office,
Correct.
I did civil litigation for 1 year at City Hall.
Okay.
Then I went on to do criminal defense for the next 10 years.
Okay.
I did district court, superior court, and then I was sent up to the murder list.
Correct.
Yeah.
What is the murder list?
So the murder list is, the murder panel, whatever you want to call it. It's a special certification that a group of attorneys get to handle appointed homicide cases.
Okay.
So we have like a dual public defense system in Massachusetts. You have the public defender's office, then you have private lawyers who accept appointed cases through the court.
Okay.
And certain lawyers can get a special certification where they can accept homicide assignments, meaning appointed murder cases from the state.
Perfect. So if there was one thing you would say you would like to change about the judicial system, what would it be?
Wow. It's hard to select one thing, but I think the one thing I would change, I don't know how I would change it.
Okay.
The one thing I would change is I would try and make sure that money wasn't a bar to getting good representation or getting a fair shot when you went into the judicial system. I think that the court tries to make sure that you're not treated differently if you don't have a lot of money. On the criminal side, you get an appointed lawyer.
Correct.
On the civil side, you are not entitled to an appointed lawyer.
That's correct.
So family, housing,
Correct.
things like that, you have to walk in there unrepresented if you don't have any money. And that gives people with money a huge advantage.
Correct.
Because, that's your life right there. So if I could wave a magic wand or divert some funds,
Correct.
I would divert more funding so people could get free lawyers in something beyond criminal cases. I think that's the biggest problem.
All right, now, folks, it's time for the Legal Outliers Corner. So currently you're working as an attorney and you're working in the judicial system. Mm-hmm. What has been on your mind?
So what's been on my mind lately is just this overall idea about fairness in the judicial system and fairness to the accused. Okay. There have been a lot of high-profile people, always, but recently that have been accused of crimes. Yeah. I think because of social media, we're at more of a risk of convicting people based on what we read in media reports. Right. And I want to remind people out there, especially people who are future lawyers, that even though lawyers have this reputation of being dishonest, law, especially trial, being a trial lawyer, is the ultimate truth. It's the ring of truth, where both sides get to come out, everyone gets to be challenged, and it's the ultimate ring of truth. And we have to be careful not to simply read things and believe everything without giving people a fair shot at due process. Right. I think that people see lawyers more of an annoyance as opposed to an asset in bringing the truth out. So I don't want to remind people that if you're studying law and you want to practice as a lawyer, it is still a noble profession. Correct. Because regardless of what people say, the good lawyers are the ones who help expose the truth. Correct. All right? Not the ones that help hide the truth. Correct. Lawyers, on balance, help expose truth. Correct. All right, and I think we've lost sight of that as we've lost a little respect for the legal profession. Correct. So I want to remind everybody of that. Obviously, we had the Central Park 5 documentary recently, and that's a prominent example. Correct. They were convicted in the media before they were given a fair opportunity, and they could never overcome that, even at a trial. And there are other people, though, we can't just say the Central Park 5. There are other people that we may not like personally, that we hear a lot of bad things about. Correct. We have to give everyone an opportunity to go through due process. And I've been a little bit dismayed at the attitude we've had towards criminal defense lawyers and sometimes towards prosecutors who are trying to go through that process. The process is still honorable. The process is what makes all of it work.
I want to thank you again, Mr. Asha White, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for tuning in. See you soon.